Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1. The air vent phasis. It started with the smell. Not a rotting smell exactly, more like a damp, metallic tang, as if rainwater had been sitting somewhere it shouldn't for too long. I only noticed it in my bedroom, usually at night when I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. My dad brushed it off as old house smell, even though our home was barely 20 years old. My mom thought maybe the air vents just needed cleaning. One Saturday afternoon, she had me help her unscrew the vent cover above my bed. I remember standing on the mattress, peering up into the narrow shaft as dust motes drifted down like tiny snowflakes. The vent opening was small, maybe 8 inches across, and beyond it, just a dark tunnel of sheet metal. The first time I saw the eyes, I thought I was dreaming. It was around midnight, and I'd woken up for no reason. My room was dim, lit only by the faint street lamp glow filtering through the curtains. I glanced up at the vent, and for a split second, I thought I saw the reflection of my own eyes in the metal. But then the reflections blinked. They didn't blink like human eyes. The motion was slow, deliberate, like they wanted me to notice. My breath caught in my throat, and I remember the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat up, staring at the vent for what felt like hours, until exhaustion eventually pulled me under. The next morning, I told my mom what I'd seen. She gave me that smile adults use when they think you're being dramatic. "It was probably a shadow," she said. "Your mind plays tricks when you're tired." But over the next week, I kept waking up at the same time, always around 12:15 a.m., and always to the same thing, those eyes staring through the vent. By the fourth night, I noticed something else. They weren't just watching. The eyes moved, shifting slightly side to side, as though whoever or whatever was in there was adjusting their position to see me better. The idea that someone might be inside the walls of our house made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't explain. One night, I got brave. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and pointed it toward the vent. The faint light from the screen made the room glow just enough to catch the shape of the eyes again. They blinked. They moved. Then, without warning, they vanished deeper into the vent. When I reviewed the video the next morning, I almost dropped my phone. The frame clearly showed a pale face, gaunt and hollow-cheeked, its lips slightly parted as if whispering something. The eyes weren't just looking at me. They were focused. I showed the video to my dad. He didn't even finish watching it before standing up and grabbing a flashlight. He climbed into the attic and shone the light down the vent shafts. After 15 minutes, he came down with a pale face of his own. "There's something blocking the duct," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Might be insulation. I'll call someone to clean it tomorrow." But the cleaning crew never came, and that night, the eyes returned. This time, I swear I heard breathing, soft, shallow, almost in sync with my own. I buried my head under the covers, my phone clutched in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to look again. 2 days later, my parents told me we were going to spend the weekend at my aunt's place. I didn't question it. When we got back, the vent in my room was gone. A solid panel had been screwed over the opening, painted to match the wall. They never explained why. Years later, after I'd moved out for college, I stopped by the old house to grab some things. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my dad about it again. His face went completely blank, and after a long pause, he said, "There was nothing in there. Just don't think about it." But last week, while scrolling through an old storage folder on my laptop, I found that video I'd taken. I clicked play, expecting the same pale face and blinking eyes. Only this time, the recording showed something new, something I was sure wasn't there before. Right before the eyes disappear into the darkness, a whisper escapes the vent, so faint I had to replay it 5 times to understand. It says my name, and then it laughs. Story 2, The Shifting Painting. When my grandmother passed away, the will was short and to the point. She left me her old house on the edge of town, the one I'd only visited twice as a child. The place had always felt heavy, even in daylight. Dark hallways, stiff furniture, and the lingering smell of mothballs and something faintly metallic like old coins or blood. I thought I'd spend a few weeks fixing it up before deciding whether to keep it or sell it. I moved in on a rainy afternoon, my boxes stacked in the living room like makeshift furniture. As I wandered through the upstairs hallway, I noticed something I hadn't remembered from my childhood visits. A large framed oil painting hanging dead center on the longest stretch of wall. It was a portrait of a woman, tall, slender, dressed in a dark, high-collared gown from the late 1800s. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and half her face was cloaked in shadow. Her eyes, though, they had a strange weight to them. The gaze wasn't quite hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It felt like she was studying me, deciding something. There was no signature, no plaque, nothing to tell me who she was. That first night, I didn't sleep well. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of creaking wood from the hallway. Figuring it was just the house settling, I got up for some water. On my way back, I glanced at the painting and froze. Her face was different. The change was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. Her head, which I could have sworn was angled straight ahead, was now turned ever so slightly in my direction. And her eyes, before, they'd seemed to look past me. Now, they were locked directly onto mine. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my pulse loud in my ears, until I finally forced myself to look away. I told myself I must have misremembered it. Shadows and tired eyes could play tricks, especially in a strange house. By morning, the painting was exactly as I remembered it from the day before. Still, the unease didn't fade. Over the next week, I began to notice other changes. The woman's lips seemed to part slightly, as if she were just about to speak. The shadows on her face grew darker, creeping higher each time I saw her. Once, I was certain her painted hand had moved from resting loosely on the chair's armrest to gripping it, her knuckles faintly tense. I began avoiding the hallway at night, but the painting seemed to know when I was nearby. I'd catch the faintest sound, a whisper, the drag of bristles across canvas. Whenever I passed, the air in that hallway was always cooler than the rest of the house, like a draft was trapped there. Then came the first storm. The rain began just after sunset, tapping lightly on the roof, then building into a steady drumbeat. As the wind picked up, the hallway's cold intensified. I could feel it leaking into my bedroom, even with the door closed. My curiosity got the better of me. I cracked the door open and peered down the hall. The woman's face had shifted again, but this time, the change was impossible to explain away. She was no longer looking at me. She was looking past me, down the hallway toward my bedroom door. I shut the door so fast the frame rattled. From that night on, the changes became more pronounced whenever it rained. Her gown appeared to ripple, as though caught in a wind only she could feel. Her eyes followed me more aggressively. Once, during a thunderstorm, I saw that her painted body was no longer angled in the stiff, formal pose of a portrait, but was subtly turned, as though she were in the act of standing up. I stopped sleeping well. The creaks in the hallway grew louder. I swore I heard soft, deliberate footsteps on the nights when rain hit the roof. Sometimes there was a faint scratching sound, like nails or fingertips brushing the wall just outside my door. One evening during the worst storm yet, the power went out. The house sank into darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. I lit a candle, against every instinct screaming at me, stepped into the hallway. The painting was gone. In its place was an empty frame, its interior not showing plaster or wallpaper, but a deep black void that seemed to drink in the candlelight. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. It wasn't a void, it was a narrow passage, the faint outline of wooden walls visible beyond. At the far end, illuminated only when lightning lit the sky through some unseen crack, stood the woman from the painting. Not painted, not flat. She was there. Her skin looked just as pale as in the portrait, her dark gown moving as though stirred by an invisible wind. She didn't move toward me immediately. She just watched, her head tilted slightly, as though deciding whether to step forward. When she did, the shadows around her seemed to stretch toward me like reaching hands. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the candle, and ran to my bedroom. I slammed the door and pressed my back to it. A moment later, I heard it. Soft, deliberate steps on the hallway floorboards. They stopped just outside my door. There was a pause. Then, so faint I almost missed it, the sound of fingertips brushing the wood. When morning came, the power was back. I crept into the hallway, half hoping the frame would still be empty so I could convince myself I'd gone insane. But the painting was back, hanging exactly where it had been before, except for one change. The woman's painted hand now rested not on the armrest of her chair, but on the door frame in the portrait, fingers curled inward, holding it open. I haven't spent another night in that house, but sometimes, when I'm driving through town on a rainy evening, I find myself glancing toward the darkened windows of the upstairs hallway, and I could swear I see her, pale face pressed to the glass, watching. Story 3, the hollow bedroom wall. When I first moved into the old Victorian house, I thought the creaks and groans were part of its charm. The place had stood for over a century, weathering storms and generations of owners. The bedroom I chose was small but cozy, with a tall window overlooking the garden and a peculiar section of wall that jutted out slightly. It wasn't part of the house's exterior, just an odd, inward bulge as if something had been added or hidden behind it. I didn't think much of it until the first night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint sound, a slow, irregular tapping, like fingernails brushing wood. It came from that strange wall, not the pipes or the window. I lay frozen, straining my ears, trying to rationalize it as the house settling. But the tapping grew more deliberate, almost curious. The next morning, I examined the wall more closely. It sounded hollow when I knocked on it, unlike the solid plaster elsewhere. I figured it might be covering an old chimney or unused closet. Still, the way it seemed to answer my knocks unsettled me. I decided to ignore it. That worked for about 2 days. The tapping returned, this time earlier, around midnight. I turned on my bedside lamp, staring at the wall as the sound shifted from tapping to a faint shuffling, like something, or someone, moving slowly on the other side. The wall seemed almost to breathe, the faintest vibrations rippling through it in sync with the noise. My skin prickled. The landlord, Mr. Fenton, was a quiet, thin man in his 70s who lived a few streets away. When I mentioned the noises, he gave a forced smile and muttered something about old houses having their quirks. His voice was tight, his eyes avoiding mine. That was the first red flag. By the end of the first week, the sounds escalated. The shuffling was joined by faint whispers, too soft to make out but undeniably human. Sometimes they were urgent, sometimes slow, drawn out, as if whoever or whatever was behind the wall was struggling to speak. I stopped sleeping through the night, my dreams tangled with visions of shadowy figures pressed against unseen barriers. One evening, while reading in bed, I heard a thud so sharp and close that my lamp rattled. I jumped up, my heart hammering. Without thinking, I pressed my ear to the wall. The whispers ceased immediately. Then something knocked back. It was a slow, deliberate knock, 3 taps, evenly spaced. I yanked my head away and didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I brought a small flashlight and decided to investigate. Along the baseboard, I found a section where the paint had chipped away, revealing a narrow seam. It wasn't a wall at all. It was some kind of panel, sealed up and painted over. My mind raced with possibilities, a crawl space, a forgotten storage area, or something worse. I texted a friend, Darren, to come over that night. If I was going to open the wall, I wasn't doing it alone. When he arrived, armed with a screwdriver and a healthy dose of skepticism, we pried at the seam until the panel gave way with a groan of old nails. Dust exploded into the room, and the smell hit us, a stale, suffocating scent of damp earth and something metallic. We shined the flashlight inside. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a narrow, vertical shaft, maybe 3 feet wide, running from floor to ceiling. The walls inside were covered in old, peeling wallpaper, the same floral pattern that had been in my bedroom before I moved my furniture in. But the most disturbing thing was the small wooden chair placed directly facing the panel. And on the chair was a pillow. The fabric was torn, stained in ways I didn't want to identify. Behind the chair, in the dim corner of the shaft, I thought I saw movement, something pale slipping out of sight. We both stumbled back, coughing from the dust. Darren tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Probably just a mouse or something. That night, the knocking didn't stop. It was relentless, soft at first, then growing louder, like fists pounding against the wall. At 3 a.m., I heard a voice. Clear, close, and right against the panel. Don't close it. I bolted upright, my pulse racing. The panel we'd removed was still leaning against the far wall, leaving the opening exposed. I could feel cold air spilling into the room from it, carrying that same damp smell. Against my better judgment, I crawled toward it. Inside, the chair was still there, but now the pillow had been moved to the floor. And standing just beyond the beam of my flashlight was a figure. It was a woman, or at least shaped like one, her skin a waxy gray, her hair long and damp. She was wearing a nightgown that clung to her in places like it was wet. But her face was wrong. Her eyes were too wide, too round, and they didn't blink. She tilted her head at me and smiled. A slow, unnatural curve of her lips. I slammed the panel back in place so hard that paint flakes rained down around me. I wedged my dresser against it and sat in the far corner of the room until the sun came up. The next day, I called Mr. Fenton again, my voice shaking as I demanded to know what was behind the wall. There was a long pause on the line before he sighed. "You weren't supposed to open it," he said quietly. "That room, it doesn't like to be disturbed. Last tenant left in the middle of the night, said she saw someone watching her from in there. The one before her." He trailed off. Well, she didn't leave at all. I moved out that afternoon. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night with the unshakable feeling that there's a hollow space right next to me. Something just on the other side of a thin layer of wood and plaster. And sometimes, in the silence, I swear I hear 3 slow knocks. Story 4. The Disappearing Eyes. When I moved into the old duplex on West Oak Street, the first thing I noticed was the wallpaper. Faded flowers, once bright, now dulled into a pale, dusty yellow. The whole place felt like it hadn't been touched in decades, but the rent was cheap, and I was desperate to live alone for the first time in my life. The first night passed quietly. The street outside was calm, and the hum of my little space heater lulled me to sleep. But on the second night, as I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone, my eyes wandered toward the far wall, the one my bed's headboard rested against. The wallpaper there was different, almost smoother, as though someone had replaced a section of it. And right above my pillow, about eye level, the faintest impression of an oval shape could be seen in the pattern. It looked almost like a face. I laughed it off, assuming it was just the way the wallpaper had bubbled over the years. But that night, as I turned off the light, I had this strange urge to look at it again. I stared at the oval shape until my eyes adjusted to the darkness. That's when I saw them. 2 round, glinting reflections, like the light catching a pair of moist, unblinking eyes. I sat up immediately and flicked the lamp back on. The wall was flat, lifeless, just wallpaper and faded glue. I told myself it was a trick of the mind and tried to sleep. The next few days were normal. I worked, came home, cooked simple dinners. But every night around the same time, I'd glance toward the wall and swear I saw those eyes again, just faintly there in the darkness. Always watching, always unblinking. I began sleeping facing the other way, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, like invisible fingers pressing lightly into my back. By the end of the first week, I stopped using the lamp at night because I didn't want to see how close those eyes might actually be. But avoiding them didn't work. I started hearing something soft from that wall, a faint, deliberate tapping, like a fingernail brushing along wood. One night, it escalated. The tapping stopped, and something pressed from the other side of the wall, making the wallpaper stretch ever so slightly toward me. I could see the outline of fingers, slow and searching, tracing the space above my headboard. I froze. The pressure stopped after a few seconds, and then the eyes appeared again. Brighter this time. They blinked. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my keys, and didn't stop running until I was in my car 2 blocks away. I didn't go back until morning, and even then, I brought a hammer. I tore the wallpaper off the section above my bed. Underneath, I found a small wooden panel, poorly fitted into the wall. It came loose with a single pull, revealing a narrow, hollow space between the walls. It was empty. No, not empty. There were deep scratches along the wood, like something, or someone, had been clawing from the inside. And then I noticed the faint smell, stale and almost metallic. I patched the wall with plywood and moved my bed to the opposite corner. For a while, the nights were calm again, but last week I woke at 3 a.m. to see something glinting in the shadows of the far wall. The wrong wall. The eyes were back. This time they weren't fading. They were closer than ever. Story 5. The Watcher's Passage. I inherited my great-aunt's house last winter, a creaking century-old structure that had been in my family for generations. She'd lived there alone for the last 20 years after my great-uncle died. The will came with no strings attached, just a brief note in her careful handwriting. Never open the passage. That was it. No explanation, no location, just those 4 words. When I arrived, the place felt like it was holding its breath. Every floorboard groaned under my weight, and the walls seemed to lean inward ever so slightly, as if listening. My first night was a quiet one, too quiet. The kind of silence where you start hearing your own heartbeat. It was on the 3rd night that I first heard it, a faint scraping sound, like something brushing along plaster. It came from behind the wall in the upstairs hallway, the one lined with old family portraits. At first, I thought it was mice, but the sound was slow, deliberate, with brief pauses, as if whoever or whatever was making it was stopping to listen. The hallway had a strange quality. No matter how many lamps I plugged in, it was never well lit. The air there was cooler, and I could never quite shake the feeling that I wasn't alone when I walked through it. The portraits didn't help, faces of relatives long dead, staring with eyes that seemed too sharp, too aware. A week in, I noticed something new. One of the portraits was crooked. It was a painting of my great-uncle as a young man, smiling faintly in his military uniform. I reached up to straighten it, and as I did, I realized it was heavier than it looked. The frame didn't rest flush against the wall. There was a gap. The gap hid a seam, and that seam revealed a door outline. I froze, my great-aunt's note flashing in my mind. Never open the passage. I should have walked away. I should have nailed the frame back over it and pretended I'd never seen it. But my curiosity was a gnawing thing, and it had been chewing at me ever since I moved in. That night, after pacing for hours, I returned with a crowbar. The frame came down with a reluctant groan, and the small, narrow door behind it stared back at me. It was no taller than my shoulder, painted the same faded cream as the wall. The handle was brass, worn down to a dull sheen. It turned too easily. The door opened into darkness. A gust of cold, stale air hit me, carrying with it the scent of dust, old wood, and something faintly metallic. I pointed my flashlight in and saw a cramped passage, walls of rough wood, the ceiling low enough that I'd have to crouch. The passage ran along the inside of the wall, parallel to the hallway. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, and my light caught faint scratches on the walls, vertical, clustered together, almost like fingernail marks. About 10 feet in, the passage turned, ending in what looked like a dead end. Then I saw them, 2 small holes in the wall ahead of me, perfectly round, about eye level. I put my flashlight between my teeth and peered through one. My stomach dropped. It looked directly into the hallway. From here, someone could watch anyone walking by without being seen. The weight of realization settled heavily on me. This was the passage. My great-aunt's warning now felt less cryptic and more urgent. I backed out quickly, but as I did, I heard a sound that didn't belong to me. A slow inhale, like someone breathing in after holding their breath. I turned, flashlight sweeping the narrow space. Empty. Still, the air felt heavier, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. I closed the small door, shoved the portrait back into place, and told myself I'd lock it in the morning. But that night, the sound returned. It started around midnight, faint creaks moving along the hallway wall. I sat in bed, listening, heart pounding. The steps paused outside my room. Then, I heard the softest whisper, almost pressed against the plaster. "I can see you." I didn't sleep that night. Over the next week, things escalated. I'd walk into the hallway and notice that a different portrait was slightly askew. Sometimes the air in the hallway would be freezing, my breath visible. Twice, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a dark shape slipping behind the frames. One evening, determined to end it, I nailed the portrait to the wall. As I hammered the last nail, I felt the vibrations carry through the wood and into something hollow behind it. Something that tapped back. That night, the tapping spread through the house. Walls, floors, even the ceiling. It was everywhere, and woven through it, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of breathing. On the 10th night after opening the passage, I woke to find every portrait in the hallway on the floor, frames shattered. The narrow door was wide open. My flashlight beam trembled as I stepped closer. The passage was pitch black. I crouched, peering inside. Two eyes stared back at me. They didn't blink. I stumbled backwards, slamming the door shut and shoving the heaviest dresser I could find against it. The portraits are gone now. I burned them the next morning. But the hallway still feels wrong. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear breathing in the walls, moving closer, waiting for me to open the passage again. Maybe the most unsettling part of these stories isn't the idea of eyes in the walls. It's the fact that sometimes those eyes belong to something that isn't supposed to exist, or to someone who's been there far longer than you've realized. Whether they were intruders, restless spirits, or something else entirely, one thing is certain. They were watching, and they didn't want to be found. Sleep well tonight, if you can.